but what have you done on your own? And I said, well, I don't have much of a resume yet because I just started. So it was truly a snowball effect where we were doing a lot of small projects, some stuff that wasn't even necessarily permitted work. Maybe you could classify it as deferred maintenance. Somebody owned a building and just needed it pressure washed and painted and whatever. And I would bring in a couple subs and just do it just to have some work, and you do one project and that snowball starts growing a little bit more. You get a reputation and at least had some references then that I could point people to and said, hey, I've done work with this guy. I understand that this is, a leap of faith for you too, because I'm young and I'm new, but talk to him and just see what his experience was like.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is
Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Andrew Eshelman, founder and president of Eshelman Construction in Nashville, Tennessee, a Nashville native who returned home to build in one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Andrew attended Auburn University, earning degrees in finance and economics, along with a master's in building construction. He began his career in Atlanta as a construction engineer for a large commercial contractor, where he directly oversaw more than $150 million in contracts across multiple projects. And in 2014, Andrew moved back to Nashville and saw the explosive growth happening across the city. That momentum led him to obtain his contractor's license and launch Eshelman Construction. Today, Eshelman Construction is a commercial general contractor specializing in ground-up construction with projects across restaurants, hotels, multifamily, office, and retail development. The firm has completed several high-profile projects in downtown Nashville, helping shape the city's evolving skyline. And today we're going to talk about entrepreneurship in construction, specifically building in one of the fastest growing markets in the country and what it takes to actually scale a construction company when the city is booming. And with all that said, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate you having me.
Yes, let's just hear it. How did you get in the space? Why did you decide, hey, I'm going to go get a master's degree in construction, and then go do construction and then eventually start my own firm? Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. As far as starting the business, I've always been entrepreneurial. Even as a teenager, I had a landscaping business in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and that led to odd jobs. It doesn't snow too much here in Nashville, but we'd get snow maybe once or twice a year. And so I would shovel snow or rake leaves if we had elderly neighbors that couldn't do that. Or, maybe somebody would go out of town and they need me to take care of their pets, stuff like that. So it kind of just snowballed. And, I realized that I could use word of mouth marketing and print out flyers and put them in people's mailboxes. And so that's literally what I did. So I knew that I would start a business in some capacity. I didn't necessarily think it would manifest in the way that it has, thus far. But yeah, I went to Auburn, like you mentioned, and had a really great experience there, and originally did, business undergrad. So I took a little bit of an interesting pivot when I decided to go to grad school. This was kind of on the tail end of the Great Recession when I was graduating. The job market wasn't great. Oddly enough, the construction market wasn't really great then either. But, I've always been interested in construction. I've always been interested in real estate and real estate development. And, I figured there's kind of multiple paths to get in that. And I realized that, I had some of the finance and some of the business background, but not really as much of the construction side. My dad and I worked on a couple of projects when I was in high school. He had a few investment properties, and so we would, do some labor and just grunt work on those, mainly me doing the grunt work. So we did a lot of the work ourselves. And so it really just kind of taught me that business from the ground level.
Nothing wrong with child labor. All I'm saying.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it's all in the family. I think there's rules around that, right?
That's right. You can do mean, horrible things to your children. It's fine.
Yeah,
No,
that's right.
I'm joking.
So yeah, just decided to make the pivot into the construction program. Auburn's got one of the highest rated construction programs in the nation. So that helped me kind of make my decision. And so, just stuck around for an extra, not quite year and a half to finish the graduate program. And then, as you mentioned, I immediately went to work for a large commercial GC in Atlanta as an engineer, and, really great experience, but very quickly realized that I wasn't really cut out for the corporate world. And there's nothing wrong with the people that want to take that path. And I still have friends at that company, and you can climb the ladder and rise through the ranks, and you can do extremely well for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But, I realized that my passion was always in entrepreneurship and kind of starting my own things. Got the opportunity a couple years later to move back to Nashville. And, I was just blown away. My parents kind of live out in the suburbs, and I grew up out in the suburbs. So I knew that market very well, but then I would come downtown and I would see what was going on. And my friends would text me, "Hey, we're meeting up at this restaurant or this bar." And I'm like, "Where? Like, where are you talking about?" And so I would go and explore these new neighborhoods, and it was just rapidly changing. And so it just seemed like right place, right time. And, just took the plunge, got my license and went for it. And 10 years later, here we are. So still kicking, still in business somehow, but it's been an interesting journey. I would definitely say that the first couple of years were pretty rocky. It was mainly just me, and I was doing everything. I was wearing all the hats in the business, and starting kind of a solo GC without an investor, I didn't take out a loan. I truly bootstrapped it. It was very challenging, and I had some relationships that I developed and had some kind of business development, things that were in the pipeline, but it wasn't like I had 10 contracts lined up that I knew I was going to be busy for the next 3 years or whatever. So really just took a leap of faith and took the plunge. And, like I said, here we are. So
let's talk about that. So a lot of times when people go off on their own, it's like, I've got like 3 clients that need me to build some stuff. They're all about hopping on board on this new adventure with me. You didn't have that per se. So how do you say like, all right, I'm going to become a solo GC, solo person GC. I'm going to build these relationships. I'm going to, I've got some feelers, but that's a big leap. So 1, what made you said like, I have to do this? And then 2, how did you then get the deals in the door?
yeah, I think I was a little naive and a little overconfident. I think you've got to have some of that, at the time.
It's a good entrepreneurial trait. You got to be able to
That's right.
build the plane as it's flying. Like you have to be willing to be able to build it as you go, and just got to have it done before you hit the ground, and then you'll be good.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, to use that same kind of aviation analogy, I was like, okay, I've got this much runway, and if it doesn't work, then that'll be very readily apparent. And if not, then we'll take off and we'll try to fly this plane. So, like I said, I did have a couple of leads, but they weren't like awarded contracts by any means. But, I let some people know that I was starting this business. I was getting my license, and, I was going to be open for business. I'm very thankful. I had a couple people early on that were very willing to take a chance on me, And I think that's really important, because if I didn't have those chances or those opportunities, I don't think I'd be in business today. Or if I am, it would be very different. So, I think that a lot of the people at the time, they had seen what I'd done at previous places, previous stops. And they said, okay, that's great. That's awesome. But what have you done on your own? And I said, well, I don't have much of a resume yet because I just started. So it was truly a snowball effect where we were doing a lot of small projects, some stuff that wasn't even necessarily permitted work. Maybe you could classify it as deferred maintenance. Somebody owned a building and just needed it pressure washed and painted and whatever. And I would bring in a couple subs and just do it just to have some work, and you do one project and that snowball starts growing a little bit more. You get a reputation, and I at least had some references then that I could point people to and said, hey, I've done work with this guy. I understand that this is, a leap of faith for you too, because I'm young and I'm new, but talk to him and just see what his experience was like. So yeah, like I said, it was definitely a snowball effect. But it was really, again, it was just right place, right time, being in the Nashville market, and it was really heating up. And I knew that, the age old saying, like, the rising tide lifts all ships. It was very, very accurate. So, I don't think that I'm some like business genius by any means. I think it was just, saw the opportunity and just went for it, which, I think that if I hadn't have done it, I would have regretted it. So I don't regret the path that I took, even if it was a little bit more challenging. But, looking back on it now, I'm married, I have 3 kids, I have a mortgage, all of these things, like the calculus now of doing that would be very, very different than it was back then. Because I said, okay, well, if I screw up or if I fail, I can always get a job in the industry. I had a lot of contacts, and I knew that everybody was hiring at the time, and it still is a strong market. And it's still a situation where if you're qualified, you can get a job in construction in Nashville. So that if that was my worst case scenario, if that was my fallback, what the heck, let's go for it. So.
No, that's awesome. So obviously starting the small and odd end jobs, kind of like, hey, I just want to be on a job site here and do whatever that is. When did you eventually get that first actual build, like full on, like, hey, we're gonna do an actual build?
Yeah. So I had met a family that owned some real estate in downtown Nashville, and it's a really interesting story. I won't go into all the details, but they started the Johnny Cash Museum, if you guys are familiar with that.
That's
it's
awesome.
in downtown Nashville. The founder was really good friends with Johnny and his family. They had all his memorabilia and all this stuff, and they had some extra space in their building. And so I don't know if you guys know who Patsy Cline is, but she's kind of an old school, country singer from back in the day, definitely a Nashville legend. So they were going to do an exhibit for Patsy. So we came in and we built that out for them within their building. And they were one of the people that I mentioned that, really took a chance on me and gave me an opportunity early on. I think it was $250,000 or $300,000 build out, which to me at the time was huge. Now that's really small for us. And, I went in and I just worked my butt off. And so that was kind of the big contract that I had at the beginning. And then that led to more work with that family in particular. They've expanded and they own a bar on Broadway, which we worked on. And they own a bunch of other properties downtown, a lot of bar and restaurant, type of concepts. And so did a lot more work with them. And then that kind of, again, talk about the snowball, that kind of rolled into, okay, now we have a little bit of a resume and reputation. We did these projects that are downtown that are a little bit more high profile. And so being able to kind of advertise based off of that, and then just keep it rolling and just meeting the right people. So it just takes years to really plant the seeds and cultivate these relationships.
So when it comes to sort of business development and building relationships, right? That's kind of what we talk about in the industry. Is a lot of it's all relationship driven. Is there a process that you found to building relationships, or is it just pure luck, or is it something in between?
I think it's somewhere in between for sure. There's definitely some luck involved. And, we talked about timing earlier. I think timing is always very important as well. My strategy these days is it's definitely different than when I was first starting up. But, I think we talked about before that I'm still willing to cold call. I'm still willing to do cold outreach to people. Now I'm a little smarter about it, and I try to find Nashville. Yes, we're booming. It's a growing city, but this industry is pretty tight knit and a lot of us know each other. So, if there is somebody that I'm trying to meet, I try to figure out who they know that I know, that maybe I can get a little bit more of a warm introduction, because that seems to be a little bit better received than just cold outreach. But look, I'm not opposed to it whatsoever. As far as like the process, I wouldn't say like I've got some detailed CRM, that I've got to like have all these touch points at X times and I've got to follow up with emails or whatever. But I do kind of have a list of people in my head that I talk to frequently that are in the industry. I'm very open to having lunch, grabbing coffee, doing whatever, even doing a walk and talk. That's kind of popular here, where people like to go to a park or something and walk. So, really just constantly meeting with people in the industry, and even people that are outside of the industry. And just hearing about what they're working on, what's potentially coming in the pipeline, even if it's not something that they're directly doing. They're like, hey, I actually know this guy. He's building this project. I think that you guys should meet. You guys should talk to each other. And it's like I said, the seeds take a long time to plant. I used to use like a hunting analogy, more of like you eat what you kill, but I really revised that. I think it's more of it's a farming analogy. You reap what you sow, and, you plant the seeds, but it's not like you're going to dig it up every day to make sure it's growing. You're going to water it, you're going to put the fertilizer, and then you're just going to kind of let it go. But it is nice, now that we're kind of 10 years in, we're a lot more established. We do get a lot of inbound leads, which, I'm very cognizant about our reputation, and our reputation is what allows that to happen, because people wouldn't refer us if we did bad work, so going back to the relationship component of it. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, I'm always very honored when people reach out, even if it's maybe not the right fit for us. But if we're getting referrals from any kind of source, I'm always very thankful for that. But again, still taking that mentality of like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find what's out there, and, make sure that we're leaving no stone unturned.
That is a good analogy. You don't dig it up every day to make sure it's there. It's very much, you have to do the work, but then you got to kind of wait and like, believe in the fact that like I've done good work, therefore eventually this will harvest, right? Like that's essentially
That's right.
the farming analogy, which makes tons of sense.
So with all the farming efforts, you've grown. So I like the analogy.
Yep, I like it.
So that's on the we'll call it on the sales side, right? Business development sales side. How do you balance that with hiring? So what do I mean? If you hire, do you hire sooner, or do you hire, just in time, right? And then, because the unfortunate fact is that when you hire, we'll say just in time or potentially too late, you don't have enough time to train, or it's really expensive to hire when you need it now, right? Snap my fingers, I need it now. You're going to be paying quite possibly over market. So how do you balance the hiring compared to growth of the company and what's coming in, the work that's coming in?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've by no means perfected that, but, over the course of 10 years, you definitely learn some lessons. I've done it both ways, to your point, in terms of we've hired people that were early, but that was a strategic investment that I made because we met with this person. I've got two guys in particular that I'm thinking about, and, it was just like, we've got to hire these guys. Like, we just got to make it work, because I could just tell culturally they're going to be a great fit. From an experience standpoint, they're a great fit. I'm not really at the point yet where we can hire a new grad out of college and just train them from scratch. And that's certainly one of our long-term goals, is to be able to do that. But we're just not set up for that right now. If I'm paying somebody a salary, I need them to be able to, go and manage a project. And I don't leave our guys on the island by any means, but I am a delegator, and, expect them to be able to go and handle their responsibilities. So, and then we on the other side of that, we've definitely hired people that was more of an immediate need. Sometimes the timing works out that it's okay. And then sometimes, to your point, like you're kind of in a pinch. So, what I really try to do is at any given point, we may have 2 or 3 people that we're talking to. Sometimes people reach out to us directly. So it's interesting to be on the other side of that when there's cold outreach, or, there may be a warm outreach where it's a friend of a friend or something like that. And certainly people that I know in the industry, I tell them all the time, like, look, if you have somebody that might be potentially looking for an opportunity, even if we don't have an immediate opening, let's talk, let's at least just have a conversation. And so I can kind of gauge not only interest level, but experience level. Would this be a good cultural fit? Things like that. And so in fact, I've even had a couple conversations recently because we've got a lot coming in the pipeline for 2026. We have a lot that's already signed that is started or is starting. And then we have a lot more bids that are coming up right now. You just don't know. 25 really hurt us because we had a lot of work lined up, but then half of it got postponed. The good news is that it's all now hitting in 26. But, if I'd hired somebody back then I would have been in a really bad pinch. So that is one aspect of construction that's really challenging, is that all of that stuff that happens upstream from us is completely out of our control, and going back to just the market and some uncertainty with interest rates and tariffs and, all of these things that are happening globally right now, they're giving a lot of people pause. Like, are we going to have crazy oil prices, which will then in turn, trickle down to raw materials of stuff that's, getting shipped from overseas? Or is there going to be a 25% tariff that hits? And then all of a sudden, steel or aluminum or copper or whatever is going to be 25% more expensive. I don't have the answer to those questions. I can only control what I can control. So it's certainly been humbling for me. Between running business and being a dad of 3 at the same time, I've been very humbled. And I get it now from a lot of different perspectives. It's not easy, but again, going back to, what I was saying, like, control what you can control and just keep moving. And I'm kind of at the point where with some of these opportunities, until we have a signed contract and we're like on site with a permit and we're starting work, it's kind of, I don't want to say first come, first serve. That's not really the right analogy, but it's kind of like, I'm not going to block off portions of my schedule without you firmly committing to this project, because that's kind of what happened last year. And we turned down a few opportunities that we probably could have pursued, and those projects did move forward, and then the other ones got postponed. There's no right or wrong answer there, but certainly you want to have reserves and working capital built up to where, if you do have to float some salaries for a while, then you can do that. And you're not worried about making payroll. But nobody likes paying somebody to do something that, they're not doing at that time. But I think one of the things that we've been able to do internally, at least, and granted, we're not a massive company, we're definitely growing, but we've been able to get a lot of our guys to do multiple things. So, estimating, for example, some of the guys will pop in, and if they're a little bit slow, they can help with some of the bidding and estimating. We had one of our senior PMs that, in fact, he's the most experienced person in our company. And he came to me and said, "Hey, I'm really tired of kind of the PM side. I've been doing it for a long time," but he actually started as a superintendent. And he said, "I want to go back to the field and run the work as a superintendent." I said, "Great, let's do it." So give the guys a lot of flexibility to, potentially pivot and do different things. And, being a smaller company and being lean, we can wear a lot of different hats. And so it's kind of just the needs of the company and whatever comes up at that time.
So
yeah, having a
ingest.
bullpen is important, of people that you've not necessarily like I'm hiring you, but just I know who you are and I have vetted that there is a culture fit here. So if you are interested, perhaps one day that this makes sense, that makes it a lot easier. And obviously stars still need to align, right? It's not like I'll just pull you from wherever you're at or something, but it does help having, hey, it's almost like prospecting, right? Like I have a set of people that I am talking to regularly that potentially could come work here for us.
So, in jest, what's harder to run, company or family?
Oh man. That's a hard question. I feel like both of them are kind of a 24/7 thing. I tell people I have two full-time jobs, and it's true. And it's funny, the parallels, especially with construction and parenting. Sometimes I say with some of the subs and vendors that we work with that it's adult babysitting. And so, I take care of my kids, and then I come to work and I take care of my adult kids. So, that's unfortunately just the nature of the beast. Look, again, Nashville's a busy market. So some of the subs at times it fluctuates, and sometimes they're super busy and it's hard to get their attention. And then, sometimes it slows down and they're more willing to kind of work with you. But I don't know. That's a good question. I would say they're pretty close. It's pretty darn close. I feel like the company is a kid at times. So yeah, I think my wife, if I said the business, my wife would she'd probably kill me.
Well, yeah, that's called managing the family again. That just goes back to the,
That's right.
making sure you say the right things in the PR sense of it.
That's right.
Me and Will frequently talk about, because we're both dads of younger children, and it's the leadership lessons you learn from raising a child are so applicable to running a business and leading other people, right? Because effectively, even though smaller and learning just basic skills, but like it's still leading is leading, right? Like that concept doesn't change.
It's so true. It's so true. Over the course of 10 years, we've had some really great clients, and then we've had some ones that aren't so great. And it's so funny. We had one client in particular, and obviously not naming names here, but he was just a very difficult person to deal with. And, he wanted to kick and scream and stop about everything. And I remember talking to our team internally one time, and I was like, this is basically just like dealing with my son, who I think he's almost 6 now. I think he's about 3 at the time.
Yes.
And I was like, I do this pretty much all day, every day. Like they just want to scream and whine and complain, and you just kind of let them. You can't reason with a 3-year-old. And then there's some times where certain people, you're just not gonna be able to reason with them either, even though they are adults.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to say, hey, look, and I'm really not a guy that's going to rub somebody's face in the contract, but ultimately we do sign a contract, and there's a reason why all that stuff is in writing. But certainly there's times where, you go kind of above and beyond that and just say, hey, look, we're adults. I understand that, you may think that there's an issue here. We don't necessarily agree, but like, let's just sit down and figure this out, and let's cut the BS and all the, the foot stomping and the screaming. And some people answer to that and they'll sit down and calm down. And then some people won't. And the ones that won't, it's just not even worth engaging. You just finish the project and move on, work together again,
So I really appreciate that answer. So when it comes to difficult people, is this something that you go, you know what, I will deal with it now, but then I don't have to deal with you forever? Is that the mentality?
Yeah. I mean, you try to vet people ahead of time, especially clients, but it's never perfect. And there are absolutely times, and, I will say, going back to being humbled, I think I'm a decent judge of character normally, but there have been times where I thought I kind of had, beat on somebody, and then it turned out that that's really not who they were. And you're halfway through the project. So what do? You're not going to walk, and you're just going to figure it out and finish it. So, it's definitely complicated. I always go into a client relationship saying, hey, I would either like to do repeat business with you if that's an opportunity, or at least we leave this project where you would refer me to somebody else. Or if I sent you as a reference, you would give your honest opinion of me. Does that always happen? No. I mean, it's again, being in business for 10 years, there's always examples, and we're by no means perfect. I'm not saying that we've never screwed up. Certainly we have, but with those clients, you kind of have to take that mentality of like, okay, well, this is kind of going to be one of those one-off type of projects. Let's just get it done. It's not worth the brain damage of, going through this and just battling all the time. I mean, it's truly not, And so at that point, it's just like, what is the most efficient way to get this project done and just be done with it? So we've done a lot of bars and restaurants, as I've mentioned before. And there's some characters in the hospitality industry, and we've had some really great clients in that industry. We've had some bad ones.
Actually, why don't we dig into that a little bit? Good relationships versus bad relationships. I think this is a good topic, right? You talked a little bit about the bad. If you want to expand on what bad relationships look like if you have some examples, great. But also contrast that, and if you have similar situations where what bad relationship looks like versus what good relationship looks like, do you have some? And can you kind of compare contrast what good and bad relationships look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we can start with the bad. We've got plenty of both, but one situation in particular pops out to me. We cold reached out to by a developer who was doing a ground up new construction project in Nashville. And it was really like the size, the type of project it was kind of a mixed use project. It was right in our wheelhouse. And so it checked a lot of boxes. I was like, okay, this seems like it could be a good fit for us. And as we got into it, there started being some maybe like yellow flags, maybe not quite red flags, things that I thought, okay, we can work through this. Maybe there's just some misunderstanding here. But the further we got into it, I realized like this guy is completely in over his head. He was a developer in kind of a loose sense, but mostly in, like the residential world and not necessarily the commercial world.
Yeah.
IRC and IBC, the code is very, very different. And certainly dealing with the city of Nashville, it's a very different process when you're talking commercial, versus residential. Commercial, you're thinking about life safety and egress and, sprinklers, fire alarm, all of that, those kinds of items. And it was clear that he just didn't have the experience. And yeah, it was painful. It was definitely painful. And I realized, thankfully, early on that, hey, before we got really deep into this project, I don't think this is going to work out. And I think that we should all just cut ties and go in a different direction. And to this day, in 10 years, that's the only time that's ever happened. But it got to that point where it was kind of just egregiously bad. And I said, okay, like this is clearly not going to work. And just, really frustrating stuff. Like we had a budget and we would bill things that were allocated to line items in that budget. The budget was agreed on. He signed the contract. And we would bill and he would say, well, this is too expensive. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's literally within budget. I'm billing you. I'm not overbilling you. I'm literally just billing you what you already agreed to in the budget. Well, but it still could be done cheaper. And I'm like, dude, you signed a contract. We have a budget that's stipulated in the contract. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
If it wasn't a suggestion.
Right. Like if I had $10,000,
I thought these were more just guidelines. I don't know.
Pretty much. So in his mind, that was just kind of the to your point, the guideline, and that if we could do it cheaper, that it could be done cheaper, and that he would save money. And I'm like, I don't think you understand how this works. Now, if I had allocated, let's say, $10,000 for this line item, and I tried to bill him 15. Okay, let's talk about that. That would be overbilling. But that was not the case. So it just became very clear, like I said, that this was not going to be a good fit. And we walked away from the project. And like I said, the only time that's happened in literally 10 years. And it's unfortunate because I think had he been a little bit easier to deal with, it would have been a great project. We would have knocked it out and done a good job. I think we had the right subs, the right team to do a good job. But he was just taking this mentality of like, I'm going to just do everything as absolutely bare bones, cheaply as possible. And so I kind of followed along after we left, and they did have somebody take over the project. And of course it was a nightmare. It was an absolute disaster. So I don't regret, walking away whatsoever. So those are the ones that you just say, you know what, it's not even worth it. We're clearly never going to work together again. So we're just going to let bygones be bygones, and we're going to walk away. And, I've just realized like my mental health is so important running business and being a dad of 3, like, yes, this job is going to be stressful no matter what. There are going to be times where, like last night where I've got sick kids and they wake up in the middle of the night and I'm tired. Well, guess what? I've still got to work, but I don't have to deal with people that are going to just be unreasonable and, pardon my French, but are going to be an asshole. Like, that's just there's not enough time in the day for that. So that's kind of like, one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, we've had multiple, great relationships. There's a restaurant client in particular that I'm thinking of here. They were from out of town, but they've gotten more of a presence in Nashville now. It's a hospitality group. And the founder is a guy that I really respect. And he's just really, really great to work with. And, as long as we do what we said we were going to do, we were on time, we were on budget. There were really no major kind of issues with the project. They were cool. They weren't gonna ride us and just be unreasonable just to be unreasonable. I think there's kind of this connotation with contractors, and I don't know why this is the case. I don't know if you guys have, maybe talked about this with some of the other guests that are GCs, but it's kind of like this whole thing that a contractor is like a mechanic that, maybe your client doesn't fully understand construction. So there's almost this era of like, are you trying to screw me over? Are you trying to pull one over on me? Like you go to a bad mechanic and they tell you, oh yeah, you got to replace your transmission. Well, that may not be actually the case,
Okay.
So, I don't know if that is kind of a universal thing, but, I think certain people, they're just skeptical for whatever reason, or maybe they just don't have enough experience and haven't done enough construction projects to know that like it's a very imperfect industry. I'm reliant on, maybe on one given project, 40 to 50 people, subcontractors, vendors. I'm dealing with inspectors, engineers, architects. Somebody in that line is going to make a mistake. And if I make a mistake, I will own up to it. And there's been times in the past where we've had to correct something out of pocket at our cost because it was the right thing to do. But on the other hand, if the architect or an engineer makes a mistake and there's a cost and schedule impact, I understand that that's very frustrating for the client, but we have to separate the reality here of like, we didn't cause that. And I don't want to delay the project either. And I certainly don't want to add a change order that was probably unnecessary, but sometimes it happens, So again, it just goes back to being reasonable and finding clients that are willing to just sit down and work through things. Like there's an issue. Yeah, this sucks, but what can we do? And, there's been times where we've been able to, we have run into those issues. Maybe there was a schedule or a budget impact. And I'm like, hey, I'm more than willing to kind of move some things around in the budget to try to massage this. And maybe it's not as big of a hit. Or, schedule. Maybe we can go in and resequence and try to work around this in a way that's not going to delay the project. So for the good clients, you're more than willing to do that. For the bad ones, it's just not even worth kind of engaging with them, unfortunately. Yeah, that group was really great to work with, just left the project. And, I tell the guys, like, we don't necessarily have to be best friends with the clients when we leave, but you certainly want to be at the point where if we sent them as a reference, they would tell the truth. Or, maybe they would refer us on a future project, which is what has happened with these guys. And then they're active and doing other things in the Nashville market too. So, anyway, that was kind of a long answer, but that's both ends of the spectrum of good and bad relationships.
Well,
Earlier you mentioned cold calling, and that would be the initial start of a relationship. How do you go about that? Because most people would say, I don't want to have anybody calling me that I don't know. It's people just annoying me, essentially. How do you go about that?
Yeah, it's certainly easier 10 years in because we at least have enough of a reputation that people, maybe they don't know who I am, but they've heard of the business, or maybe they're familiar with some of the projects that we've done.
easier when you have a book of work that says, hey, look, I did stuff, in comparison to like, well, I haven't done anything by myself yet, but I swear I'm good.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So early on, that was very challenging. It was very challenging. And so, maybe you reach out to 10 people and at that time you get 1 or 2 responses. And so you just double down on the ones that do respond. But yeah, I have no issues even now reaching out to people. We do have a lot of out of town groups that are coming into Nashville right now, whether it's, on the bar restaurant side, we have these hospitality groups. So it's like an actual established group that maybe they have investors or they're backed by private equity or something like that. They're well funded. They're sophisticated. They don't necessarily know the Nashville market. They don't know people here. So I have no issues with reaching out to those types of people. And same thing, on the developer side, there's developers that are coming in here, investors that really want to have a piece of Nashville. They want to come in here and see what's going on. And they don't necessarily have relationships if they're from Austin or, Chicago, New York, California. Those are kind of been the big four, I think, that we worked with a lot of out of town groups. So again, I have no qualms with reaching out to them and just saying, hey, here's what we can do. More than willing to sit down with you guys. If you're going to be in town, like let's meet in person, let's grab lunch or something. If not, no worries. If you've already got maybe a relationship that was already established, not stepping on anybody's toes. And I think even in the local groups, I think what I've learned is that, some of these people do have pre-established relationships, but for instance, in one situation we had a couple of years ago, there's a developer that I had a good relationship with, still have a good relationship with, and they used the same GC for like 10 years. And eventually I think that GC grew and they kind of pawned him off on a junior PM that didn't know what he was doing, and it pissed him off. And they had a project that didn't go very well. And then all of a sudden I got a call and then I did 3 projects with them. So it's always good to just reach out to people and say, look, I understand you're working with XYZ. I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but if there's anything that I could ever look at, or if you want a second opinion, call me, and just kind of leave it at that. So, I found that people here, maybe it's a Southern hospitality thing. I don't know, but people here are very friendly and normally very receptive when people reach out. And obviously, like, look, everybody's busy, so not everybody can grab lunch or coffee or whatever. I do like meeting in person, but worst case scenario, we just hop on a quick call. It's like 5-10 minutes is not going to kill anybody, just to have a quick chat. So you just never know what's going to happen with those conversations.
It is true. People in Tennessee, they're just nice. Y'all are nice, man. I don't know how else to put it. Originally from Chicago, Will's in Chicago, certainly has a Midwest, for large city, definitely Midwest feel. Now in Phoenix, very different. People don't like talking to each other. But Tennessee, man, you guys are just very nice, wholesome people.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. Obviously growing up here, that was always kind of the case. There is an element of, sometimes people are too nice and they don't just say it how it is. And so you've got to walk a fine line, especially in construction. We have some guys that, maybe had operated in other markets where, you get into a pissing match with a sub and you yell and tempers flare and stuff like that. And I'm like, there's sometimes is a time and a place for that, even in Nashville. But people do not respond. If that's your default, that you're just going to go straight to that, people are not going to respond well to that, and they're not going to want to work with you. And if you've got a project that's a year long, maybe not smart to start the president with a sub from day one, that you're just going to beat them over the head all the time. So, there is a balance, though. You can't be too nice because then things aren't going to get done. So you gotta walk that line. I think there's a way to do it and a way to deliver a message in a graceful, kind of Southern hospitality way without, just completely, getting into a screaming match with somebody.
You mean like how I try to deliver messages to my 3-year-old and it doesn't like hearing that, that it's not going to go his way, but he's going to take it anyways.
That's right. And I say this as a dad who has absolutely lost my temper with my 3 kids too. So I by no means have perfected this.
Yeah, constantly learning. So you've invested obviously a whole bunch of time, in we won't say a perfect process, but trying to perfect processes around development, business development, as well as people, right? And even kind of in the processes of cold calling. What about technology? What learning lessons or have you learned in implementing new technologies or investment in technologies? Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've struggled with project management software until recently. We made the switch to Procore I guess it was about 2 years ago. And look, I mean, it's expensive. It may be the most expensive or one of the most expensive softwares that's out there for GCs, but we were spending so much time and there was so much inefficiency with some of our previous softwares that I don't know how you necessarily put a dollar value on the ROI. I guess we could track everybody's time that was wasted and then actually put a dollar value on it. Whatever the delta was of what we were paying and how much Procore is, that efficiency that we've gained is well worth the delta there, at least to us.
We don't recommend you actually doing that. We've done that for clients, and it's a lot larger of a number than you would hope. I'm going to tell you that right now.
We've done the actual time audits, and it's a humongous delta, way bigger than most people realize.
I do not doubt that whatsoever, and we've certainly experienced that. We had the software we were using prior to Procore. I'm not going to name the name, but we had a project where we had the budget, we had the change order log, and we had the owner pay app, and none of it matched. And we were like, what the hell is going on here? Like, we're trying to run a business. We're trying to run a project like this. This isn't right. And so we had to get with the software team, and they had to start all these support tickets because it was something happening on the back end with the software. And, meanwhile, it was affecting our billing cycle and our ability to churn out pay apps on time. And then when the owner would ask for backup, they're like, the budget says this, your pay app says this, and the change order log says this, and it doesn't match. Like, what are you guys doing? So, at best, it made us look incompetent. At worst, it made the owner think that we were trying to pull something on them, which, neither was really the case. It was just a limitation of the software. And, we quickly realized, okay, this is not working. Before that, we used Buildertrend, and, Buildertrend, I have nothing bad to say about it, but it was definitely more geared toward residential. That was kind of the one issue that we had. It was fairly basic, but it did what it needed to do. It just wasn't really set up for more of a commercial type of project. Didn't really allow you to do the style pay apps and stuff like that within the software. So yes, it was a lot more cost effective, but it had a lot of limitations for commercial. I mean, if I were just switch and be like a custom home builder or like a spec residential developer, I would absolutely use Buildertrend because I think it's great for that. And then before that, I was doing everything on a spreadsheet. So you can kind of see the progression here of, over the course of 10 years, maybe 2.5 years in each one. And Procore, I definitely think is here to stay. We have no plans on ever changing from that. I mean, I guess never say never, but at least in the short to medium term future, everything's cloud-based. The project team is all there. Owners, reps, architects, engineers, subs, vendors, it's all in one place. And the efficiencies that we've gained through the pay app process, we do stipulate in the pay apps now, in the subcontracts now, that the subs have to bill through Procore. And that's also in the AIA format, the schedule values. It's very detailed. It's all percentage completion based. So the sub can only bill what's in their contract, because we had several instances prior to that where subs were getting their wires crossed and they were overbilling. And so that format really helps control that and make sure that they're actually billing what is due to them, but they can't overbill. And if a change order is not in there, then they can't bill it. And, we've had a few situations there too, where a sub did some work without an approved change order, and then they are trying to bill it in Procore, and they're like, hey, why can't I bill for this change order? And we're like, what change order? You didn't approve that. So sorry. and you know, we're going to be reasonable. We're going to try to figure something out, but it's just, there's a lot of checks and balances there. And yes, you know, from a process standpoint, maybe there's other softwares that are a little bit easier to use that have less of a learning curve, but you don't have those checks and balances in place. So I feel like we've just gained a significant amount of efficiency through that. Cause I mean, truly, you know, 80% maybe of a project cost are all direct to the subcontractors. And the rest of the 20% is either direct cost for us, and then really just our general conditions, kind of overhead, profit, you know, fee, those kind of things. So if we have the lion's share of that going through Procore, then it's a pretty streamlined process where, you know, it takes the PM 15, 20 minutes to pull all that together. They can send out the billing period to the subs. The subs bill it, and then we can import all of that, assuming that the sub invoices check out. We can just import that straight into the owner pay app, and you can make an owner pay app in like 5 or 10 minutes. It's really streamlined everything for us. So we really like it. And I mentioned, you know, some out of town clients as well. We've had several of those, and they really like it because of all the cloud-based features, daily reports. They're getting videos, they're getting pictures, they're getting the daily logs of who's on site, what's happening. And so when they're not here physically in person, that's a big help for them too. So, you know, other than Procore, that's kind of our main project management software. We do use BuildingConnected for pre-construction for our bidding. I think that's also through Autodesk. I think Autodesk owns that as well. That's been great. We can put bid packages together, and same thing. The software really automates a lot of that process. And then we can follow up with people, and we can send out messages to all the people who have come that they're bidding. And you can type a message and send it in a few minutes rather than going through an email list being like, who do I need to add to this? Like it's all there. And then, you know, on site, the guys have iPads. So we have Bluebeam and, you know, obviously all of the rest of the iPad apps. I would say Bluebeam is kind of the main one for, you know, if you've got the Apple Pen, you can pull it open, you can circle something, you can take notes, and you can shoot it off, you know, ask a question or put in an RFI to an architect in 5 minutes. Bluebeam also allows you to scale. So if you're looking for a certain dimension, you know, you can scale it on the software directly. So, you know, I would say that we're fairly tech forward. You know, I don't know where all this AI stuff is going to land with construction. I certainly don't think the construction process is ever going to be automated in my lifetime, at least. You know, maybe way in the future, if they've got robots that can replace, you know, subcontractors, that's going to be a whole different animal. But, you know, we've certainly integrated some AI workflows into what we do, but that's really just more, you know, efficiencies. I've used it for bid leveling, for example, that I get multiple bids from different subcontractors for the same scope, but I want to ensure that they actually have the scope right and then what the deltas are. And so you can quickly upload that to, you know, your AI of choice. I don't blindly trust it. I obviously will spot check and make sure that the it's not hallucinating. The figures we're getting are real. But I can say, well, I'll give you another example. So we went through a value engineering exercise on a project. And so we were working with one sub. So it wasn't like I was looking at other subs, but the scope had changed. The owner had made some changes. There were multiple revisions. And so I could use that to track, here's the original, here's the second update, here's the third update, what changed in each one, and what was the delta in terms of dollar value in each one. And it could very quickly pull that together and put it in a spreadsheet, which I could have done absolutely manually, but it would have taken me 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, and it did it in 30 seconds, you know? So I do think there's AI workflows with things like that we can use. And I'm certainly, you know, or at least I think that I'm fairly tech savvy. And so I'm always looking for new opportunities. But like I said, until we have robots on job sites, which may happen at some point, I feel like we have decent job security in the construction industry right now. So curious if I may flip the script for a second, but curious to hear if any of your either previous guests or clients are using AI in their workflows.
So the short answer, yes. A lot, in all kinds of ways. We've got multiple episodes. Just search up AI within Building Scale. There's multiple episodes where literally the entire episode is just talking about AI implementation, etc. So
interesting in regards to the robot piece, more in a factory setting today compared to in the wild, essentially. But that, that's the next, huge because like once you actually have some form of robot, if it's humanoid or not, being able to go onto a job site and being able to deliver, I mean, that's the scary place. First, we're going to take all the back office jobs first. I am totally not making a fear-mongering announcement here by any means, but those are the things that are easier to automate today, just simply because if it's digital, it's just inherently easier in comparison to physically moving items in different places.
Right. Yeah, I do think maybe on the robotic side that could affect prefab. I think that's an obvious.
That for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's already happening with 3D printing and some of those other things. So if that can be, I think there's been a lot of startups in that space that have failed, but if that could really get some traction, that's an area that I see that's more, relevant to today's world. Now you're still going to need the guys to unload it and actually install it on the site. I don't think a robot's going to be able to do that, but the more we can prefab, we love prefab. Streamlines the actual building process.
It's awesome.
Look, as much as we'd love to talk about AI for another hour, our hour is up, which means we got to go to our last question. And Justin, why don't you take it away?
Yes. If you could go back 20 years, Andrew, what advice would you give yourself?
I would tell myself to buy a lot of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, for sure. No question about that.
If we're talking more business advice,
life, just things that you wish you would have known 20 years ago that you have the beautiful knowledge today.
Yeah, I would say to trust your gut. That's kind of what I did, going back to the story of starting the business and being in the Nashville market. Like I said, there may have been some overconfidence there, or maybe being a little naive. But at the same time, I do think that looking back, I was insecure about the fact that I didn't have this, really established resume or company. And that was an uphill battle. And I think I had to mentally get over that block, in my head. And I absolutely had the capability and obviously had the right attitude to go in and just do it and figure it out. But that can be intimidating when you're and you're trying to start something from scratch. So trust your gut. That's what I would say.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Before we say our goodbyes, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are on social media. Our Instagram handle is at Eshelman Construction, and that's ESHELMAN. We also have a website that is linked on the Instagram page. And my email, it should be on the website as well.
Awesome. I will put all those links in the show notes. And anything else you'd like to say to the listeners before we say our goodbyes?
Listen to more podcasts.
Love it.
Love it.
I can appreciate that, certainly. This has been a ton of fun, listeners. I hope you had as much fun as me and Andrew had today. And until next time, adios.
Adios.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
Scale.